Endocrine disruptors are types of chemicals that, you guessed it, disrupt the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a very, very important system in your body that uses hormones circling in the blood to send messages all throughout your body. And it's very important, and you definitely need it, because if your endocrine system is not functioning properly, then all sorts of problems start to happen. How hormones work: they are a type of molecule that bind to a hormone receptor that causes the receptor to do things, which causes the cells to do things, etc., etc. Profit. Now, many cell receptors are specific to only one or two different type of molecules. They will not allow molecules that do not have the correct shape to bind to them, so that keeps them very specific to avoid being over-triggered by just random stuff binding to it. However, there are some receptors, specifically some hormone receptors, that are what are called promiscuous, which basically means they will bind to a wide variety of things. They get out there. That opens the door for things that are not the target hormones to bind to these promiscuous hormone receptors, a bunch of these things being endocrine disruptors. Now, hormone disruptors are basically anything that acts like a hormone but isn't. So it has the same effects that your regular hormones do have, but they are not regular hormones. These are things like birth control, like estradiol, which mimics estrogen. Estradiol is not actually a hormone, however estrogen is, but estradiol has the same effect because it binds to the estrogen receptor. Now, sometimes when taken on purpose, such as estradiol, the effects are fine. They actually have the effect that you want them to, because estradiol has the same effect of estrogen, so when you start producing less estrogen, like when you go through menopause, estradiol helps just with the effects of that acting as estrogen. However, there are things, specifically many pesticides, that act as endocrine disruptors when you don't want them to. These things include things like dioxins, DDT, methoxychloroquine, and when you have these and they start messing with your endocrine system when you don't want them to, that causes many problems. For example, some of these problems can be things like developing cancers, having reproductive issues, causing birth defects like some teratogens that I mentioned in my previous video, as well as messing with the immune response and overall health. It can cause fertility issues, cause sterilizing when you don't want to, they can cause birth defects, they can cause like many things. What is interesting, however, hormones tend to have a pretty diverse structure, so there's many different types of hormones and not all of them look the same. For example, this is DDT. It's a pretty commonly used pesticide, however it has been banned in many places due to its health effects. And this is a dioxin. I'm not sure which specific one, but it is a type of dioxin, and it's also produced like it's involved in pesticides. So these two chemicals have pretty different structures and pretty different functions. However, they are both endocrine disruptors. They both bind to different hormone receptors and cause effects of the hormones, and then that can cause a bunch of health problems, which is why both of these chemicals are very bad if they get into, like, your body. As well as they have effects on other things too, such as fish and birds and insects, which is why they're used as pesticides. However, they do tend to have effects on non-target organisms, such as fish or humans. Here's another one you have probably heard of. This is glyphosate. It's an herbicide most commonly known by Roundup. Now, there was a very big controversy surrounding this a few years ago where it was thought to have caused cancer. It was then proven to not cause cancer, but it's basically like it didn't cause cancer in this specific situation. There was a whole thing about it. I'm sure you can find it on the internet if you really care. But another thing, as this may be a suspected carcinogen, it may also be a suspected endocrine disruptor. Again, not good. Now, endocrine disruptors are kind of sketchy because, one, they all have very different structures, so you may or may not know if they're going to be endocrine disruptors when they come into production. Two, they have very different dosage response curves, which is basically a graph that shows the dosage of the chemical versus the effect that it has. Usually, it's relatively the same shape in a bunch of different chemicals, where the higher the dose, the bigger the effect. However, endocrine disruptors tend to have different wonky curves. Sometimes it can go like this, where there's a very big effect at a low dose and a high dose, but not so much in the middle. Sometimes it can go up and down, where there's a very high dose very high effect with a middle dose, but not with a low or a high dose. Sometimes it's weird, so it makes them very unpredictable, and we really do not know a lot about the effects, unless they're being specifically studied. So basically, endocrine disruptors are very weird, a little bit scary, and we do not know a whole lot about them as a whole. We know kind of a lot about specific ones, but as a whole, you don't really know what's going to be an endocrine disruptor until you observe some effects.